We know the coordinates of the largest unexcavated tomb in history. We have the equipment, the resources, and most importantly, government funding. But archaeologists haven't excavated this site for more than 20 years. Under a 200-meter hill in China, rivers of real mercury flow. Ancient records say that homemade crossbows are hidden in the tombs, ready to fire at any uninvited guest. No one can verify this, but there are some things that make people take the threat seriously. In neighboring excavated tombs from that era, loaded crossbows have been found, whose bronze mechanisms have been preserved quite well, even after 2,000 years. Hello, my friend, you're on the Top channel. Today we'll look at places that science can't explain, a place from Earth's history where a whole billion years disappeared, a bog that preserves bodies as if people died just yesterday, and we'll come back to this tomb in China later. A new ocean on our planet. We should start with a place where history doesn't just hold a mystery, but literally shows it in real time. In Ethiopia, in the Afar Desert, there's an area where Africa is slowly splitting at the seams. And this isn't just a beautiful metaphor, but a real geological process that will one day result in the formation of a new ocean. In 2005, after the activity of the Dabahu volcano, the ground there split open in just a few days, forming a crack about 60 kilometers long. In some places, its width reached up to 8 meters. The ground was sinking, and new cracks were appearing all around. And it all looked as if the planet had decided to speed up a process that usually takes not a human lifetime, but millions of years. The strangest thing here is not that the Earth cracked. Faults are nothing new for geologists. What's strange is that the birth of a future ocean is usually hidden somewhere underwater, at the bottom of the seas, far from human eyes. But in Afar, this process can be seen almost at the surface. Several tectonic plates meet beneath this place. They slowly move apart, and the crust becomes thinner. Hot mantle rises from below, and Africa is gradually preparing to split into parts. Scientists say that in millions of years, water may come here, and in place of today's dry desert, a new ocean will appear. But what catches my attention in this story is something else. We're used to thinking of the world map as something permanent, as if the continents have always looked like this and always will. And then you find a place where the planet itself calmly shows that for it, our borders, countries, and cities are just temporary markings on the surface. And the Farsky Fault personally scares me because of this feeling. It reminds us that the formation of the Earth is not finished yet. Where did a billion years of history go? There is a place in the Grand Canyon where you can see one of the strangest things on Earth. It looks like just a rock. Stone below, stone above, between them, a thin line. But if you ask a geologist, he'll tell you that between these two layers, almost a billion years are missing. And that's hard to wrap your head around. You're not looking at a simple pit, not at a ruined city, not at the bones of an ancient animal. You're looking at an ordinary rock. But in this rock, there's a huge chunk of the past missing. At the bottom, there are rocks about 1,700,000,000 years old. On top, there are rocks that are about 520 million years old. And everything that should have been between them just disappeared. It's as if the Earth was writing its history, and then someone tore out some of its thickest chapters. Imagine a book where after page 100, it immediately jumps to page 500, and everything in between has been torn out. No traces, no explanations, just emptiness. It's the same here. One layer lies on top of another. There should have been a billion years between them. But scientists blame glaciers and continental movement. At one time, huge masses of ice could literally scrape kilometers of rock off the surface of the Earth. That's why these layers were carried away by water, wind, and time. And they disappeared so long ago that now it's almost impossible to restore them. But the most interesting thing isn't even that. After this missing piece, the history of life suddenly speeds up dramatically. Creatures with shells, eyes, and hard bodies appear in the oceans. The world, which until then was almost invisible in stone, begins to leave more and more traces behind. And then a strange thought arises. Maybe the Earth didn't just lose part of its history. Maybe it was this very loss that changed something. The rocks were worn away, new substances entered the oceans, the water changed, and life on the planet became more complex. Scientists can't know everything. They're ordinary people who look at this stone just like we do. In front of us is a place where there seems to be an explanation, but you still get the feeling that you're looking at the trace of a huge event that happened so long ago that only the emptiness between two layers of stone remains. And the most interesting thing is that this kind of oddity isn't found only in the Grand Canyon. Similar gaps in the stone's history are found in different places around the world, in China, Australia, and even in Russia. The poet kept an ancient ant. Sometimes the past disappears in entire layers, and sometimes it is preserved in such tiny things that you might not notice them for decades in an ordinary museum box. In Weimar, Germany, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's personal collection is housed. We are used to remembering him as a poet, but he was also a passionate naturalist. By the time of his death, he had more than 18,000 stones, minerals, and various natural formations. And just recently, scientists studied a piece of amber from this collection and found inside an ant about 40 million years old. It got trapped in resin back when there were completely different forests, different animals, and a different climate on Earth. Then the resin hardened, turned into amber, ended up in Goethe's collection, and lay among other specimens for almost 200 years. The most interesting thing is that the ant was preserved so well that they were able to scan it with a CT scanner and create a detailed three-dimensional model. Scientists saw details of the internal structure that had never been observed before in such ancient ants. And what I like about this story is not just the age of the find itself. 40 million years is almost impossible to imagine. This ant wasn't discovered on a remote expedition, hidden underground in a cave, or waiting for archaeologists in the desert. It was lying in a museum collection, in a box that just hadn't been looked at for a long time. Sometimes, it turns out, you don't need to search to the ends of the earth to make a discovery. It might be sitting on a shelf, labeled by a person who died almost 200 years ago. And while we think that everything important has already been studied long ago, there may still be things waiting in old personal collections that have quietly lain there for tens of millions of years. This place can only be seen from space. In the Sahara, there is a place that from above looks as if the Earth has opened a huge eye and is staring straight into space. This is the Rewrote structure, or the Eye of the Sahara. It is located in Mauritania in the middle of the desert and consists of giant rings about 40 kilometers in diameter. 40 kilometers is not just a big crater, it's the size of an entire city. But the strangest thing is, if you find yourself there on the ground, you will hardly understand anything. In front of you, there will be rocks, hills, a dry plain, sand, and sparse vegetation. You can walk there for hours and not even notice that you're inside one of the most recognizable objects on our planet. The whole picture only appears from above. From satellite images or from orbit, you can see that in the middle of the desert lies a huge stone structure. It's almost a perfect target made of concentric rings. That's why the Eye of the Sahara has attracted so many theories about its origin for so long, each one stranger than the last. At first, many people thought it was the result of a meteorite impact, and the logic is clear here. The object is round, huge, and clearly visible from space. At first glance, it really does look like an ancient impact crater. But when scientists began to study the rocks, that theory started to fall apart. A real meteorite impact leaves behind special traces. The rocks experience tremendous pressure, and the rocks melt. The destruction pattern looks a certain way. No such signs were found at the Eye of the Sahara, so it's not a scar from a cosmic rock. Fans of alternative history have linked this place to Atlantis, because Plato described its capital as a system of rings of water and land. Some talked about an ancient civilization, others about traces of extraterrestrial intelligence, because the object looks too strange, as if it was deliberately drawn in the middle of the desert. But the official explanation is much simpler. Scientists believe that at some point, magma rose deep beneath the ground. It didn't break through to the surface like a volcano. Instead, it pushed the rocks up from below, as if the ground bulged upward like a giant bubble. This formed a geological dome. Then, the long work of time began. Wind, water, and temperature changes destroyed this dome over millions of years. The softer rocks wore away faster, the harder ones lasted longer. That's how the rings, now visible from space, gradually formed. What's truly fascinating about this place is this. You don't have to look for aliens or Atlantis in this story. The very fact itself is already strange enough. Nature, without any plan, blueprint, or human involvement, created a figure the size of a city right in the middle of the desert. It's impossible to understand it from the ground, but it's perfectly visible from above. Sometimes the mystery is in the scale. We understand the process, but still have a hard time imagining the speed. How much time, wind, water, and erosion it took for ordinary land to turn into a giant eye in the middle of the desert. A mysterious stone structure in the forest. In the early 1950s, geologist Vadim Kolpakov was walking through the remote Irkutsk taiga, and he saw something that shouldn't have been there at all. Amidst the forest, stones, and the typical Siberian landscape stood a huge mound. It didn't look like a hill, but rather like the trace of some powerful eruption from within the earth. Later, this place would be called the Paytom Crater or Kolpakov Cone. Imagine a stone ring about as tall as a 12-story building. Inside, there's a crater, and in the center, another dome. Around it, there are shattered limestone blocks. It's not an ancient volcano, not an ordinary mountain, not a quarry, and not a man-made structure. Just a strange stone formation in the middle of the taiga. And what puzzled scientists the most was the age. According to various estimates, the crater is about 500 years old. That means it didn't appear in ancient times when there couldn't have been any witnesses, but already in historical times. Around the same century when books were being printed, cities were being built, and chronicles were being recorded in Europe, something in the Siberian taiga brought thousands of tons of stone to the surface. But there are no witnesses and there are no records either. There are legends, but no proper description of the event. The first theory was the most obvious one, a meteorite. It looked too much like the trace of something falling from the sky. A huge shape, a crater, scattered stones, a remote location. But the longer scientists studied it, the less this theory held up. A real meteorite crater should have its own traces, impact rocks, signs of an explosion, characteristic destruction. Here, it was all different. Then another theory appeared. Perhaps gases, water, and rock were rising from below. The pressure increased. The permafrost prevented it from escaping easily, and at some point, the ground was literally pushed upward. That's how this stone cone could have formed. It sounds more plausible, but still, something doesn't add up. Magnetic anomalies were recorded around the crater, and its shape remains too unusual. It doesn't look like an ordinary hill that slowly formed over thousands of years. It looks more like a place where something happened suddenly, powerfully, and without witnesses. That's why the Paytom crater still seems strange even without any mysticism. Not because an alien ship necessarily crashed there or it's the work of some unknown ancient civilization, but because there's an object in the taiga that appeared almost yesterday by Earth's standards. Yet we still can't say for sure what exactly created it. Visiting such places makes you see the ground beneath your feet differently. Where are all the dead? Take a walk through any old city that's 500, 800, or even 1,000 years old. People were born there, people died, generations came and went. Wars, epidemics, and fires happened. In theory, the ground beneath such a city should be filled with human remains. But when workers dig pits, build subway lines, and replace foundations, they find old pipes, bricks, coins, shards, fragments of walls, and sometimes individual burials. But for some reason, there are no endless stockpiles of human remains. And from this comes a simple question. Where are all the skeletons? The official explanation sounds pretty simple. There used to be fewer people in cities. Old graves were often reused. Bones were moved to common storage. Cemeteries were built over, destroyed, and dug up. Wars, fires, epidemics, new construction, and almost no traces were left. But supporters of alternative history are not satisfied with this answer. They say that before the 19th century, a person could die differently. Not just rot in the ground, but disappear, dissolve, go into the light, or even crystallize. From this, according to their version, come the old legends of ascensions, stories of radiant departures, and even the huge precious stones and crowns, which supposedly could be traces of people from the past. It sounds wild, and there's no evidence for it. But I'd like to explore this idea further, especially when you remember the Paris catacombs, where the bones of millions of people are stacked underground. Historians say that the remains were simply moved there from old, overcrowded cemeteries. Conspiracy theorists see this as evidence of a major cleanup after a forgotten catastrophe. In reality, bones don't stay in the ground forever. In acidic, damp soil, they can break down quite quickly, sometimes in just a few decades. But if the conditions are dry, cold, alkaline, or without access to oxygen, remains can be preserved for hundreds or even thousands of years. That's why under old cities, we don't see an even layer of bones everywhere. In some places, the soil destroyed them. In others, graves were dug up, remains moved, or they simply didn't survive. But in any case, considering how many people lived before us, archaeologists don't find as many remains as we might expect. Write in the comments what you think. Is this just the result of time, or is there still something strange here? The tragedy and mysteries of the Goodwin Sands. Between England and France, there is the Dover Strait. For centuries, merchant ships, warships, smugglers, and passengers have passed through it. And off the southeast coast of England, about 10 kilometers from the town of Deal, there is a place that sailors once called the Ship Eater. This is the Goodwin Sands. On the map, it's just a sandbank, but over the past 700 years, more than 2,000 ships have wrecked here. And the number of people who died, according to some estimates, reaches up to 50,000. The scariest thing about this place isn't just the storms and fog, but the sand itself. During low tide, it can seem solid, almost like dry land. After a shipwreck, people would get out of the water, stand up, and think they were saved. But then, the tide would come back. The sand would become soft and sticky again, and everything would start sinking down. One of the most famous ships claimed by the Goodwin Sands was the Admiral Garner, a vessel of the East India Company. In January 1809, it sank with a cargo of 48 tons of coins. For almost 200 years, the ship lay at the bottom until it was discovered in 1984. Then, about 1 million coins were recovered from the seabed, and the site itself was made a protected area with a restricted perimeter. But that was not the only discovery. In 1740, the Dutch ship Rewrote sank here. Nearly 250 people died on board. In 2017, large-scale underwater excavations began, and archaeologists raised silver bars, coins, leather shoes, glass bottles, pewter spoons, and even a sealed chest from the bottom, which still hasn't been opened. And the strangest thing is that the Goodwin Sands claim not only old sailing ships. During World War II on December 1, 1943, an American B-17 Flying Fortress bomber was shot down by anti-aircraft fire and crashed right onto this sandbank. The crew was incredibly lucky. All 10 men survived. Today, this is the only known wreck of such a plane in the UK, and during especially low tides, you can see it together with the wrecks of ships. Now, major disasters here are almost impossible. There is GPS, accurate maps, and navigation systems. The last serious tragedy happened in 1954 when the South Goodwin lightship broke free from its anchors during a storm and capsized. 6 people died. The Goodwin Sands are not just a dangerous spot on the map. Beneath them still lie ships, coins, weapons, airplane wreckage, and human remains. For 700 years, the sea has taken people and things here. And then sometimes during excavations or a strong low tide, it returns small pieces of these stories back. A place where missing people are found. Now imagine a place where you can walk for 10 days straight and still see the same thing all around you. Water, moss, mud, fog, and endless swamps. This is the Vasugan swamp in Siberia, between the Ob and Irtysh rivers. It's one of the largest swamps on the planet. And the scale there is hard to imagine. It's about 53,000 square kilometers, hundreds of rivers, and around 800,000 lakes. Very few people live in this vast area. So it's no surprise that there have always been many legends surrounding the Vasugan swamp. The locals spoke of strange creatures, swamp lights, man-eating bears, and the spirits of the bog. The Selkups even had an image of the master of these lands, Shelop, a huge, evil 7-winged bear. And if you imagine a person walking through the fog at night, hearing the squelching moss underfoot and seeing cold blue flashes somewhere ahead, it becomes clear why such stories appeared in the first place. But the strangest thing here isn't the legends. On the edges of the swamps, they sometimes found the bodies of people who had disappeared many years ago, and it looked as if they had died only recently, without the usual decomposition, without any sense that years had passed. Science explains this with peat. There's little oxygen in the swamp, the water is cold, and sphagnum moss releases substances that work almost like a natural antiseptic. The body doesn't decompose in the usual way, but is gradually preserved as if being pickled. That's why swamps in various regions sometimes preserve people better than tombs. What's especially odd about this place is this. To a person, a swamp looks like a dangerous place you'd better not enter. But for the planet, it's a huge living mechanism. The Vashugan swamps absorb a colossal amount of carbon dioxide, release oxygen, and store carbon in peat, which in thousands of years can turn into coal. So the place that has scared people for centuries, with its fog, lights, and missing bodies, actually also helps the planet breathe. Golden spirals from the Bronze Age. Now let's move to Germany, to the region of Lower Saxony. There, near the village of Gessel, archaeologists found one of the largest Bronze Age gold hoards in Europe. At first glance, it sounds pretty simple. They found gold, but then things get really interesting. There were 117 gold items in the ground, with a total weight of more than 1.5 kilograms. They were buried about 3,000 years ago, when there were none of the states, cities, or maps we're familiar with today. Someone carefully placed this gold in a linen bag, fastened it with bronze pins, and hid it in the ground. They didn't discard it in panic or lose it by accident. They intentionally prepared and buried it. For over 10 years, scientists have tried to discover why. It's also strange that these are hardly ornaments. There were only 3 personal items in the hoard: 2 bracelets and 1 gold brooch. Everything else was dozens of spiral rings and separate spirals. Archaeologists believe that these might not have been ornaments, but a kind of Bronze Age money. So what we have here is not just treasure, but an ancient reserve of wealth. The gold brooch stands out in particular. At one time, it was about 16 centimeters long. It is decorated with sun symbols and rows of circles. But before the hoard was buried, for some reason, it was bent. And this makes the find even stranger. If someone wanted to preserve the item, why damage it? And if it was a ritual, who was it dedicated to? No settlement or grave was found nearby. There is no clear explanation. It's just a spot in the ground where someone hid a huge treasure 3,300 years ago and never came back for it. There's one more detail. The first analyses showed that some of the gold might have come from very distant places, possibly even from Central Asia. If this is confirmed, it means that even in the Bronze Age, gold traveled thousands of kilometers through trade networks that we still know too little about. Once again, the ancient world proves more complex than we usually think. Not small, scattered tribes who lived only near their own village, but people among whom metal, ideas, symbols, and wealth could move over great distances. The desert before the pharaohs. Now imagine the desert. Not pyramids, not temples, not the familiar Egypt from textbooks, but vast dry expanses of eastern Sudan, where today almost nothing reminds you of life. Sand, stones, occasional hills, and traces of old riverbeds that dried up long ago. And it was there that scientists began to notice strange circles. They weren't discovered during regular excavations, but from a satellite. For years, archaeologists studied satellite images of the Atbai Desert east of the Nile, and gradually it became clear that these were not random spots on the ground. This was an ancient burial structure, large circular burials, sometimes up to 80 meters in diameter. In total, 260 such sites were found, and no one knew about them before. When these monuments were apparently excavated elsewhere, human and animal bones were found inside: cows, sheep, and goats. Moreover, the remains were often arranged not randomly, but around a single central figure. Scientists suggest that the chief or an important person could have been buried in the center, and the others were placed around him. And the most interesting thing here is the age. These burials date back to around the 4th or 3rd millennium BC. That means they appeared even before Egypt became the pharaonic Egypt we know from pyramids, mummies, and golden masks. But they were not built by Egyptians. These were nomads of the Sahara. People who lived in the desert raised herds and moved around places where there was still water back then, because the Sahara was not always like it is now. Once there was much more greenery here, rivers, lakes, and pastures. But then the climate began to change. The water disappeared, and the land dried up. The familiar world of these people was disappearing right before their eyes. Perhaps that is why many burial sites are located near places that were once convenient for watering. It creates a strange picture. Today we see a desert where it seems like nothing could have happened. But in satellite images, a whole system of ancient monuments suddenly appears, scattered over almost 1,000 square kilometers. And this means that what we see was not just a random group of people, but a large culture with its own rules, rituals, and possibly already a division between common people and the elite. No one knows for sure what happened to these nomads. Most likely, their world simply could not withstand the changes in climate. The Green Sahara dried up, the people left, and their burial circles remained in the desert as a trace of a civilization about which we still know too little. Another labyrinth beneath the city. Now we move to Scotland, to the southern outskirts of Edinburgh. There is a former mining village called Gilmerton. On the outside, it's an ordinary place. Houses, streets, cars, people going about their business. But just a few meters underground, there is a man-made labyrinth whose origins still cannot be properly explained. This is the Gilmerton Cave. Inside, there are corridors, halls, stone benches, tables, niches, drainage channels, and a deep vertical well. All of this was carved directly into the sandstone by hand, without explosions, without modern equipment, without machines. Someone spent a very long time and worked very carefully to carve out an entire system of rooms underground. The official story was quite simple. People thought the cave was made by local blacksmith George Patterson. Supposedly, he worked almost alone for 5 years, and by 1724 had made himself an underground dwelling. Later, he used this place as a secret tavern. On weekends, local gentlemen would go down there to have a drink away from prying eyes. It sounds strange, but it's still believable. A blacksmith, an underground tavern, stone tables, secret gatherings. It sounds like a pretty believable story. The problem is that later, researchers began to notice that the cave might be much older than Patterson himself. Maybe he didn't carve it out from scratch, but simply found existing passages, expanded them, and adapted them for himself. And that's when things get much more interesting. If the blacksmith wasn't the real creator, then who made this labyrinth? There are many theories. Some say it was the Templars, who might have hidden here after being persecuted. Others mention the Masons because the layout seems too well thought out for an ordinary cellar. Some see a connection with ancient Celtic rituals, especially because of the deep vertical well. And a more down-to-earth version talks about smugglers who needed a place to secretly store whiskey and goods to avoid taxes. And the most frustrating thing for historians is that it's almost impossible to verify for sure now. The cave was used, altered, rebuilt, dirtied, cleaned, and changed again for centuries. Too many people left their traces there, and the earliest evidence could have simply disappeared. Gilmerton Cave is remarkable not because it's huge or older than the pyramids. It's strange because it's located right under an ordinary residential area, but at the same time, no one knows for sure who created it or why. Sometimes a mystery isn't hidden in the desert or at the bottom of the sea, but literally right under the feet of people who walk above it every day, without even thinking that there's an entire underground world below. The tomb that people are afraid to study. Now let's go back to the place where this video began. In China, not far from the city of Xi'an, beneath a huge burial mound lies the tomb of Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor who unified China, introduced a single writing system, currency, and laws. In 1974, some farmers were digging a well and accidentally discovered the first terracotta warrior. Then an entire army emerged from the ground. Thousands of clay soldiers, chariots, horses, and weapons. Each warrior has his own face and details, but this was only the outer part of the complex. The main tomb of the emperor has not been opened to this day, and the reason is not that it can't be found. The location is known. The mound has been studied for decades. According to researchers, there is a huge underground palace beneath it, but archaeologists are in no hurry to open this door. The ancient historian Sima Qian wrote that rivers of mercury flow inside the tomb. The ceiling is decorated like a starry sky. Hidden in the floor are crossbows set to fire automatically at uninvited guests. For a long time, that sounded like a legend. But soil analysis above the mound showed abnormally high levels of mercury. This means the story about mercury rivers might not be a fabrication, and that's already a serious problem. If there really are large amounts of mercury inside, opening it could be dangerous for people and for the environment, no one knows for sure what will happen if the chamber, which has been sealed for more than 2,000 years, is disturbed. Traps also can't be completely dismissed as fairy tales. In neighboring Qin-era tombs, ancient crossbow mechanisms have been found, which have been surprisingly well preserved. But that's not even the main fear. The main fear is destroying what's inside. When the pits with the terracotta warriors were open, the bright paint on the figures began to deteriorate almost immediately after coming into contact with air. And in the main tomb, there could be fabrics, wood, paintings, bronze, documents, and items that no one has seen since the emperor's burial. That's why China officially says, the tomb will not be opened until technology allows everything found to be preserved. And there's logic in that. Sometimes archaeology is not just the desire to uncover a secret, but also the ability to stop at the right moment. The strangest thing is that we know where one of the greatest unexcavated tombs in history is located. We have radars, sensors, laboratories, and money. But the door still remains closed. Qin Shi Huangdi wanted to control everything during his lifetime. And after 2,200 years, it's as if he still doesn't let people into his underground world. The largest object in the universe, and the last mystery on this list is no longer on Earth. It's Olympus Mons on Mars, the largest volcano and the tallest mountain in the entire solar system. If you measure from base to summit, its height is about 26 kilometers. For comparison, Everest is less than 9 kilometers. That means Olympus Mons on Mars is 3 times taller than the highest mountain on Earth. And its base stretches for about 500 kilometers. That's not just a mountain anymore, but an object the size of an entire country. But the strangest thing is that if a person were to stand on its slope, he probably wouldn't even realize he's standing on a volcano. The slopes of Olympus are so gentle that the ascent would look like an endless plain. The true scale of this mountain can only be seen from space. Scientists explain its size by the peculiarities of Mars. The gravity there is weaker, so the volcano could grow much higher than mountains on Earth. And also, Mars most likely didn't have such active plate tectonics as we do. On Earth, the plates move and a hot spot gradually creates a chain of volcanoes. But on Mars, the lava source could stay beneath the same spot for a very long time. Eruption after eruption, layer after layer, and over millions of years, a giant was formed. But Olympus has a feature that makes it even more interesting. The base of the volcano is surrounded by a huge cliff several kilometers high. Some of its features are similar to structures that appear on Earth where lava meets water. And from this, a bold theory emerged. Perhaps at one time, Olympus stood next to an ancient Martian ocean. Or maybe it was actually a giant volcanic island. Imagine Mars not as a cold red desert, but as a planet where water could have splashed around a colossal volcano. If this is true, then we're not just looking at a huge mountain. This is evidence of a completely different Mars, a more lively, warmer Mars, with oceans, shores, and processes that today seem almost impossible. Now, Olympus is considered an extinct volcano. It no longer erupts, there's no sea around it, and the planet itself looks dead and frozen. But its size still reminds us that Mars was once more than just a red dot in the sky. It was a world with its own geological power, its own catastrophes, and possibly its own water. And after that, it's strange to come back to Earth and think that we've almost figured everything out. Here, continents crack, billions of years of history disappear, swamps preserve bodies, sands swallow ships, and under a Chinese burial mound, a sealed tomb has been lying for more than 2,000 years, and nearby on another planet, there is a volcano 26 kilometers high, which may have once overlooked an ancient ocean. Write in the comments which of these stories surprised you the most, and leave a like under the video. Every like and comment from you helps the channel grow. Subscribe and turn on notifications. A new video is coming soon.